At my parents' anniversary dinner, they made me sit at a separate table, so I left. What happened next left everyone speechless. The evening was supposed to be perfect. I had spent 3 hours getting ready, selecting the perfect navy blue dress that hugged my figure just right, styling my dark hair into loose waves that framed my face, and even splurging on a professional makeup artist to ensure I looked flawless. My parents' 30th anniversary deserved nothing less than my best effort. 30 years of marriage was something to celebrate, and despite our complicated relationship, I wanted to honor that achievement. The Horizon, an upscale restaurant perched on the 42nd floor of the city's most prestigious building, glowed with ambient lighting as I stepped out of my Uber. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline sparkled against the twilight sky. I'd made reservations here once for a business meeting, knowing the $200 per plate minimum would raise eyebrows at the office. The Clark family didn't do things halfway. At least, that's what my father always said. I approached the hostess stand, smoothing my dress nervously. "I'm here for the Clark anniversary dinner." The hostess, elegant in her black suit, smiled warmly. "Of course, Miss Clark. Right this way." As I followed her through the restaurant, my confidence began to waver. I hadn't exactly been invited. The family gathering had been mentioned casually during a rare phone call with my mother last week, and I'd simply assumed I was welcome. Why wouldn't I be? I was a Clark, after all, even if I sometimes felt like I existed on the periphery of the family. The hostess led me toward a large, round table in the center of the restaurant, positioned perfectly beneath a stunning crystal chandelier. I could see them all there. My father, Richard, still commanding attention at 65 with his silver hair and tailored suit. My mother, Eleanor, elegant as always in champagne-colored silk. My older brother, Derek, who at 35 had somehow already mastered our father's authoritative presence. His wife, Melissa, picture perfect as usual. My father's sister, Aunt Patricia, and her husband. Cousins I barely recognized anymore. And even my grandfather, who rarely left his estate these days. They were laughing, raising crystal flutes of champagne, a scene straight from a luxury lifestyle magazine. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine sliding into an empty chair beside them, being welcomed with warm smiles and enthusiastic hugs. The reality was quite different. My mother spotted me first. Her smile faltered for just a moment, so briefly that anyone else might have missed it. But I knew that look. It was the same one she'd given me when I told her I was leaving Clark Industries to find my own path 2 years ago. "Oh, Vanessa," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone, part surprise, part disappointment, that I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "We didn't know you were coming." The table fell silent. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and I fought the urge to check if my lipstick had smudged or if my dress had somehow torn on the way in. When we spoke last week, you mentioned the anniversary dinner," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. My father cleared his throat. "Well, it's good to see you, sweetheart. But as you can see, we're all settled here." I glanced around the table. There was no empty chair, no place setting waiting to be filled. They hadn't expected me, hadn't wanted me. "There's a spot for you at the side with the kids," my mother added, waving her hand dismissively toward a smaller table tucked in the corner of the room. I followed her gesture and saw the kids' table, a sad afterthought where my 10-year-old niece Emma and 12-year-old nephew Tyler sat looking bored, accompanied by my cousin's toddler and a harried-looking nanny. At 28 years old, with an MBA from Stanford and the founder of my own company, I was being relegated to the children's table. "Oh," I managed, heat rising to my cheeks. "Of course." Derek caught my eye and had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but he quickly returned to his conversation with our father's business partner. No one offered to rearrange. No one suggested bringing over another chair. The message was clear. I was an afterthought, an inconvenience to their perfectly orchestrated evening. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked to the corner table and sat down in a chair clearly designed for someone much smaller than me. Emma looked up from her tablet and offered a small smile. "Hi, Aunt Vanessa. I like your dress." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "Thanks, Emma. How's school going?" As Emma launched into a story about her science project, I tried to focus on her words instead of the humiliation burning through my chest. From my position, I had a perfect view of the main table, where my family continued their celebration as if I hadn't arrived at all. A waiter approached the main table with another bottle of champagne. My father stood, tapping his glass with a silver spoon. The restaurant quieted as he prepared to make a toast. 30 years ago, I married the most beautiful woman in the room, he began, looking adoringly at my mother. And somehow, she's still the most beautiful woman in every room. Appreciative laughter rippled through the gathering. Together, we built not just a family, but a legacy. Clark Industries has weathered economic downturns, market shifts, and global changes. And now, with Derek at the helm of our newest division, that legacy continues to grow stronger. Glasses raised as they toasted to family success and continuing the Clark legacy. I watched as my brother beamed, accepting congratulations and pats on the back. No one mentioned that his division had posted losses for the last 3 quarters. No one acknowledged that the innovative solutions he'd promised investors had yet to materialize. And absolutely no one knew that I was now the majority shareholder of Microvision Tech, the company that had acquired Clark Industries in a silent takeover just 2 days ago. I sat alone at the corner table, picking at an overpriced children's meal of chicken fingers and fries, watching my family celebrate their perceived successes while ignoring their most significant failure, their inability to see me for who I truly was. The irony wasn't lost on me. By Monday morning, I would be their boss. By Monday morning, the Clark legacy would be in my hands. But tonight, I was just Vanessa, the disappointment, the afterthought, the daughter who didn't quite fit into the family portrait. I took a sip of water and forced a smile as Tyler showed me his new video game. I could endure one more night of being invisible. After all, I'd spent years perfecting the art. In just 48 hours, invisibility would no longer be an option. For any of us. The appetizers arrived at the main table with a flourish. Platters of seared scallops, foie gras with caramelized figs, and carpaccio. At our corner table, we received a basket of breadsticks and a small plate of cheese cubes that Emma immediately began to arrange into patterns. "Don't play with your food, Emma," the nanny chided gently. I winked at my niece. "I think it looks like art," I whispered, and she beamed. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to find my cousin Olivia standing over me, champagne flute in hand. "Vanessa, I thought that was you hiding in the corner," she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Olivia and I had been close as children, but adulthood and her decision to join Clark Industries' marketing department had created a distance between us. "Not hiding," I said, gesturing to Emma. "Just catching up with my favorite artist." Olivia glanced at Emma dismissively before turning back to me. Her eyes traveled over my appearance, conducting a silent assessment that I could feel like pinpricks against my skin. "So," she said, leaning against the wall, "what are you up to these days? Still hopping jobs, huh, Vanessa?" Before I could answer, she continued, "Last I heard, you were working for that little startup. What was it called? Something with clouds or data or whatever." "Cloudstream," I supplied, keeping my voice even. I had been their director of strategic development for 8 months before leaving to start my own venture. Right. Olivia nodded, clearly not caring. "So where are you now? Or should I ask where will you be next month?" She laughed lightly, as though we were sharing an inside joke. Our conversation had caught the attention of others from the main table. My cousin Marcus wandered over, martini in hand, followed by Derek's college friend Ethan. "Vanessa's job hopping again?" Marcus joined in, his words slightly slurred. "You know, there's something to be said for loyalty. I've been with Clark Industries for 10 years now." What he didn't mention was that his position as Special Projects Director was created specifically for him after he failed in 3 other departments. His primary qualification was being Richard Clark's nephew. "Maybe she should try working for Derek. He's hiring interns," Ethan suggested with a smirk, raising his voice just enough to ensure Derek could hear. My brother looked over, a flash of discomfort crossing his face before he masked it with a practiced smile. "Only if she's willing to start at the bottom like everyone else," he called back, earning chuckles from around the table. Anger flared in my chest. I had graduated top of my class at Stanford while Derek had barely scraped through state college. I had worked 100-hour weeks at a top consulting firm while he'd been handed a vice presidency at our father's company. "I'm actually working on a new project," I said calmly. "Something in the tech space." "Oh, tech," Marcus said with exaggerated interest. "How original. Isn't everyone in tech these days?" "What kind of tech?" Olivia asked, though her tone suggested she was merely being polite. I hesitated. My company, Phoenix Innovation Labs, had developed a revolutionary supply chain management system that used artificial intelligence to predict market shifts and optimize inventory levels in real time. It was the same technology that had made Clark Industries an attractive acquisition target, despite its financial troubles. "Just solving some logistics problems," I said vaguely. Ethan snorted. "Logistics. Riveting." More family members drifted toward our corner, drawn by the growing spectacle. Even my father approached with his whiskey in hand. "What's this I hear about a new job, Vanessa?" he asked, his voice carrying that particular tone of fatherly concern that always managed to sound like criticism.
"It's not just a job, Dad.
I started my own company." For a brief moment, something that might have been pride flickered across his face. But then Derek joined us, clapping a hand on our father's shoulder. "Another one?" Derek asked, raising an eyebrow. "What is this? Venture number 3? It was actually my first independent company, but I didn't correct him. The narrative that I was flighty and uncommitted had been written long ago. "Let her be, Derek," my father said, though his indulgent smile undercut any defense. "Vanessa's always been about finding herself. Remember when she wanted to be an astronaut? Then a week later, it was a veterinarian? I was 8, Dad," I said quietly. He continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "She's creative, our Vanessa. Not everyone's cut out for the corporate world like you, son." He squeezed Derek's shoulder with obvious pride. "The real world's a bit different from those business theories they teach at Stanford," Derek added, as though his experience within our father's protected ecosystem somehow trumped my education and outside work experience. "Maybe after you've had your fun, you can come back to Clark Industries," my father suggested. "We always have room for family." "Yeah, in the mailroom," someone muttered, triggering another round of laughter. I clenched my jaw, smiled, and said nothing. The acquisition papers for Clark Industries were signed and filed. By Monday morning, Phoenix Innovation Labs would officially own 51% of Clark Industries shares, and our first order of business would be a complete restructuring of senior management. My father raised his glass. "To Vanessa," he toasted with exaggerated solemnity. "May she find whatever it is she's looking for." "While Derek makes real moves," added my uncle, raising his own glass. I maintained my smile, even as I calculated the severance packages I'd be offering most of them on Monday. The mockery continued through dinner. My job history, my fashion choices, even my decision to lease rather than buy my condo became fodder for family amusement. I endured it silently, picking at my food while the children beside me grew increasingly restless. At one point, Emma looked up at me with concerned eyes. "Are they being mean to you, Aunt Vanessa?" The innocent question caused a momentary pause in conversation. I saw my mother's face flush with embarrassment before she quickly changed the subject. "No, sweetie," I told Emma, though we both knew it was a lie. "They just don't understand me yet." "I understand you," she said fiercely. "You're the only one who doesn't treat me like a baby." I hugged her then, grateful for the unexpected alliance. As dessert was served, I checked my phone. An email had arrived from my lawyer confirming that all paperwork was in order for Monday's announcement. There was no turning back now. I looked up to find my mother watching me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of regret in her eyes, perhaps even an apology. But then she turned away, drawn back into my father's orbit. I had signed the acquisition papers just 2 days ago. By Monday, their entire world would change, and I would no longer stay silent. "I think it's time for me to go," I said quietly to Emma, who pouted in response. "But you haven't had cake. Grandma said there's a special anniversary cake coming." "I'm sure it will be delicious," I told her. gathering my purse. But I have a big day on Monday. I need to prepare. What's happening on Monday? She asked. I smiled, the first genuine smile of the evening. A new beginning. The cab ride home was silent except for the gentle patter of rain against the windows. I leaned my head against the cool glass, watching droplets race down the pane as I replayed the evening's humiliations. Rough night, the driver asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. Family dinner, I replied simply. He nodded. Those can be the roughest of all. As the city lights blurred past, I let my mind drift back to where this journey had truly begun, 14 months ago, when I'd walked out of Clark Industries for the last time. It had been raining that day, too. I remember standing in my father's office, my resignation letter clutched in my hand, watching raindrops streak down the windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. You can't be serious, Vanessa, my father had said, not even bothering to look up from his computer. We've just given you a promotion. To Associate Director of Special Projects, I replied. A position with no real authority, no budget, and no team. That had gotten his attention. He'd sighed heavily and finally looked at me directly. What do you want? Another title?
Fine.
We can discuss it. It's not about the title, Dad. It's about being heard. I've submitted 3 comprehensive proposals for modernizing our supply chain management, and all 3 have been ignored. Those proposals require massive investments with uncertain returns, he'd countered. Derek reviewed them and found them too experimental. Of course he had. Derek, whose own division was using software systems from 2010 because he didn't trust the cloud. Derek, who was hemorrhaging company money on outdated processes while claiming my innovations were too costly. The technology I'm proposing would save us millions within 18 months, I'd argued. Our competitors are already adopting similar systems. And we'll consider them when they've proven themselves, my father had said dismissively. Clark Industries didn't become an industry leader by chasing every new tech trend. I'd place my resignation letter on his desk. Then I'll have to be imprudent somewhere else. He hadn't tried to stop me. He'd simply nodded, as though my departure was an expected disappointment rather than a loss to the company. The door will always be open, he'd said, already returning to his computer. When you're ready to be realistic. What my father couldn't understand was that I hadn't left on a whim. I'd left with a plan. For months, I'd been quietly developing my supply chain management system. When Clark Industries rejected it, I decided to build it myself. Within 3 months of leaving, I'd secured initial seed funding of $2 million from angel investors impressed by my prototype. I hired a small but brilliant team of developers, leased a modest office space, and focused entirely on bringing my system to life. We worked 70-hour weeks, fueled by takeout food, and the shared conviction that we were creating something revolutionary. My team didn't care about my last name or family connections. They cared about my ideas, my leadership, and my unwavering commitment to our shared goal. By month 6, we had a working beta version. By month 8, we had our first client, a mid-sized manufacturing company willing to take a chance on our untested system. By month 10, that client's success story had attracted attention from larger players in the industry. And that's when everything changed. Axiom Capital, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country, reached out with interest in our company. The meeting took place in Axiom's sleek downtown offices. We've been watching your progress with great interest, Ms. Clark, Eleanor Zhang, Axiom's managing partner, had said as we sat in a glass-walled conference room. Please call me Vanessa, I'd replied, trying not to show how nervous I was. Vanessa, she'd amended with a smile. Your supply chain management system is impressive. Early results from your beta clients suggest it performs even better than projected. We're particularly interested in the AI component, added James Foster, their chief investment officer. The predictive analytics capabilities are well beyond what's currently available on the market. I nodded, pride warming my chest. That's our key differentiator. Most systems react to market changes. Ours anticipates them. They'd exchanged glances before Eleanor leaned forward. We'd like to offer you more than just capital, Vanessa. We see an opportunity for strategic partnership. What kind of partnership? I'd asked cautiously. One that would allow you to prove your system's value on a much larger scale, James had explained. We want to acquire a controlling interest in an established company that would benefit from your technology. And install me as what? A consultant. I'd asked. Eleanor had smiled, a sharp, knowing smile.
As CEO.
With full operational control. What company? I'd asked, though something in my gut had already whispered the answer. Eleanor had slid a folder across the table. I'd opened it to find a comprehensive analysis of Clark Industries, including financial reports that weren't available to the public. Reports that showed Clark Industries was in far worse shape than anyone realized. How did you get these? I'd asked, scanning pages that revealed alarming cash flow problems, declining market share, and unsustainable overhead costs. We have our sources, Eleanor had replied simply. The question is, what will you do with this information? Why Clark Industries? I'd asked. There are other companies that would be easier acquisition targets. True, James had acknowledged, but none offer the same narrative potential. The market loves a good story, Vanessa, Eleanor had explained. The overlooked daughter returning to save the family legacy? That's front-page material. Plus, James had added with calculated casualness, we know you'll be uniquely motivated to succeed there. They'd been right. The idea of returning to Clark Industries as its savior rather than its scapegoat had kindled something fierce within me. I'd want complete operational control, I'd stated. No interference from the board or from Axiom regarding implementation of my systems. Agreed, Eleanor had said without hesitation. And anonymity during the acquisition process, I'd added. No one knows I'm involved until I'm ready to take control. The deal was structured within 60 days. Due diligence was complete within 90 days. And 2 days ago, after months of secret negotiations, careful planning, and strategic preparation, the acquisition had closed. Clark Industries now belonged to Phoenix Acquisition Corp., a shell company owned jointly by Axiom Capital and myself. The old board was gone, replaced by members chosen for their forward-thinking approaches and technical expertise. And I was the new CEO, though no one knew it yet. The announcement was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. My first official day as the head of the company my grandfather had founded, my father had led, and my brother had nearly destroyed. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine. Despite the evening's humiliations, a sense of calm had settled over me. In just 36 hours, everything would change. The daughter they'd relegated to the children's table would become the most powerful person in the room. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. All systems go for Monday. Sleep well, CEO. I smiled and closed my laptop. Tomorrow I would prepare myself mentally and emotionally for the confrontation to come. But tonight, I would simply savor the anticipation, the delicious knowledge that the family who thought I was aimless had no idea what was coming. They thought I was finding myself. In truth, I had already found exactly who I was meant to be, and on Monday morning, so would they. Monday dawned crisp and clear, the autumn sky a perfect, cloudless blue. I selected a charcoal gray suit with subtle pinstriping, conservative enough to command respect, modern enough to signal change. I paired it with a deep burgundy blouse and the diamond earrings my grandfather had given me when I graduated from Stanford. For the smartest Clark, he'd whispered as he'd pressed them into my palm, away from the rest of the family's eyes. My hair was pulled back into a sleek chignon, my makeup flawless, but understated. Today wasn't about looking good for Instagram or family photos. Today was about power, authority, and the seismic shift I was about to create in my family's carefully constructed world. At precisely 8:15 a.m., a sleek Blacktown car pulled up outside my building. The driver opened the door with a respectful, "Good morning, Miss Clark." "Good morning, Thomas," I replied, settling into the back seat. "Clark Industries, please." As we drove through the city's bustling streets, I checked my phone. A text from Eleanor Zhang wished me luck. An email from James confirmed that the new board members were in position. Everything was ready. The Clark Industries headquarters rose 30 stories into the sky, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun. The building had always impressed me, even as a child when my father would occasionally bring me to work. It represented everything the Clark name stood for: stability, success, prominence. Today, it represented something else: my future. The security guard at the front desk did a double take as I approached. I hadn't entered this building in over a year. "Miss Clark, welcome back," he said, clearly surprised. "Thank you, George," I replied, pleased that I remembered his name. "It's good to be back. Should I call up to your father's office to let him know you're here?" I smiled. "No need. I'm expected elsewhere." The elevator ride to the 28th floor, where the executive offices and boardroom were located, gave me a moment to center myself. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my hands were steady, my resolve unshaken. I had prepared for this moment for months. I was ready. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into the plush carpeted hallway that led to the main boardroom. The executive assistant stationed outside, Marion, who had worked for my father for 15 years, looked up from her computer and nearly gasped. "Vanessa, we weren't expecting you." "Hello, Marion," I said calmly. "Is the 9 a.m. meeting still in the main boardroom?" She blinked in confusion. "Yes, but that's the emergency board meeting. Your father didn't mention you would be attending." "I'm sure there are many things my father hasn't mentioned," I replied. "Is everyone already inside?" "Almost everyone," she confirmed, still looking perplexed. "Your father and brother just arrived. The rest of the executive team should be here any minute." Perfect timing, then. I continued past her desk and paused outside the boardroom doors. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes moving about, hear the murmur of voices engaged in pre-meeting small talk. I took one deep breath, smoothed my jacket, and pushed open the doors. The Clark Industries boardroom was impressive, a massive oval table of polished mahogany, leather chairs for 24 people, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. But what caught my attention were the faces that turned toward me as I entered. Faces registered shock, confusion, and in my father's case, irritation. "Vanessa?" my father said, rising from his seat at the head of the table. "What are you doing here?" My brother Derek sat to his right, pale and uncomfortable, shuffling papers nervously. Around the table sat various executives and directors, all equally surprised by my appearance. In the corner stood James Foster from Axiom, watching the scene unfold with barely concealed satisfaction. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice clear and confident as I strode to the end of the table opposite my father. "I believe this meeting was called to discuss the recent acquisition of Clark Industries." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. My father's eyes narrowed. "This is a closed meeting, Vanessa," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Whatever you think you know about the situation, this is not the time nor the place." I placed my briefcase on the table and removed a stack of folders, sliding one to each person seated around the table. "Actually, Father, this is exactly the time and place," I replied calmly. As the new chief executive officer of Clark Industries, I thought I should introduce myself to my executive team. Those of you who will still be part of it, that is. The silence deepened, then exploded into confusion. My father laughed, a short, dismissive sound, while Derek looked like he might be sick. "Is this some kind of joke?" my father demanded, his face flushing with anger. "I'm Vanessa Clark," I said, addressing the room at large, "and I'll be taking over operations as the new CEO effective immediately. If you'll open your folders, you'll find the organizational changes that will be implemented starting today." My father slammed his palm on the table. "This is absurd. The board would never." "The board has been dissolved," I interrupted calmly, "as part of the acquisition agreement signed last Friday." "An agreement you signed, Father?" I nodded to James, who stepped forward with another folder, which he placed directly in front of my father. "You didn't read the fine print, did you?" I asked, as my father frantically flipped through the pages. "Phoenix Acquisition Corp. is now the majority shareholder of Clark Industries, and I am the CEO of Phoenix." My father's face had gone from red to white. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "Oh, it's not only possible," I replied. "It's done." The press release goes out at 10 a.m. Derek finally found his voice. "You can't do this. You know nothing about running this company." I turned to my brother, allowing myself a small, tight smile. "That's where you're wrong, Derek. I've spent the last year building the very technology that will save this company from the mess you've made of it. Your division has lost $30 million in the last 3 quarters. Did you think no one would notice?" The room erupted again, executives turning to each other in confusion and alarm. My father tried to regain control, banging his hand on the table and demanding silence. I remained standing, calm amidst the chaos. This was just the beginning, the first tremors of the earthquake I'd set in motion. The aftershocks would continue for weeks as the truth about Clark Industries' financial situation came to light, as my brother's mismanagement was exposed, as my vision for the company's future unfolded. But for now, it was enough to see the shock on their faces, the dawning realization that they had underestimated me for the last time. "This meeting is now adjourned," I announced, my voice cutting through the noise. "My assistant will be in touch with each of you to schedule individual meetings. Until then, please continue your normal duties." As the executives filed out, stunned and whispering among themselves, I remained standing at the head of the table. My father hadn't moved, his hands flat on the papers before him, his head bowed as though in prayer or defeat. When the room had emptied except for the 3 of us, father, daughter, and son, I finally allowed myself to sit down. "Why?" my father asked, his voice barely audible. I met his gaze steadily. "Because you never listened." The aftermath of my boardroom revelation was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. By noon, the press release had gone viral, with business publications scrambling to get the full story. Mystery CEO of Clark Industries revealed. Founder's daughter takes control. I sat in what had been my father's office, now mine, watching the digital ticker of Clark Industries' stock price. It had dipped initially as the market absorbed the shock, then steadily climbed as my interview with the Wall Street Journal hit the wires. I'd outlined our new direction with precision, emphasizing modernization, technological integration, and aggressive growth strategies. Investors were responding positively to the promise of fresh leadership and innovative vision. My assistant, not Marion, who had tearfully cleared her desk by 10:30, knocked and entered with a tablet displaying breaking news. "Ms. Clark, the audit team has finished their preliminary report on your brother's division," she said, handing me the device. The numbers were worse than even I had anticipated. Derek hadn't just been incompetent. He'd been reckless. Funds allocated for research and development had somehow found their way into consulting fees paid to shell companies that led back to his personal accounts. Client contracts had been fulfilled using outdated, cheaper components while charging premium prices. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was fraud. I pressed the intercom. "Send in the legal team." By 3 o'clock, Derek was being escorted from the building, security guards flanking him as employees watched in stunned silence. I hadn't wanted the public humiliation, had offered him the chance to resign quietly, but he'd chosen confrontation instead. "You've wanted this your whole life, haven't you?" He'd spat, standing across my desk, his perfect hair disheveled for the first time I could remember. "To bring us all down?" I wanted recognition. I'd corrected him calmly. "You turned it into a war." His face had contorted with rage. "Dad was right about you. Too emotional. Too vindictive." "The audit wasn't personal, Derek. The numbers don't lie." I'd slid the report across to him. "The SEC won't see this as a family squabble. They'll see it as criminal." That had drained the color from his face. He knew as well as I did that securities fraud carried serious consequences, including prison time. "What do you want?" he'd asked, his voice suddenly small. "Your resignation.
Today.
And your cooperation with the investigation. In return, we handle this internally. No criminal charges unless the board overrules me." He'd signed the papers without another word. Now, as afternoon faded into evening, I faced the mountain of work ahead. Department heads needed reassurance. Top clients needed personal calls. The new board required a detailed briefing on our go-forward strategy. But first, I needed 5 minutes of peace to absorb what I'd done. I swiveled my chair to face the windows, looking out at the city where the Clark name had been synonymous with business excellence for 2 generations. My grandfather had built this company from nothing. My father had expanded it into new markets, and I would transform it for the digital age if I survived the fallout. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "What have you done?" I set it aside without responding. Then it buzzed again. From my father. "We need to talk." And again, from an unknown number that I quickly identified as my Aunt Patricia. "How could you do this to your own family?" The messages continued pouring in, relatives, family friends, business associates, all expressing degrees of shock, disappointment, or fury. None offering congratulations. None acknowledging that I might actually be qualified for the position I'd claimed. I silenced the phone and turned back to my computer, where hundreds of emails demanded attention. One stood out from Emma, sent from her mother's account. "Mom says you're the boss now. Does that mean you get to tell Daddy what to do?"
Cool.
Heartsuit. Despite everything, I smiled. At least someone in the family saw the humor in the situation. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. My assistant appeared again, looking apologetic. "Your father is here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insistent." I straightened my shoulders. "Send him in." My father entered like a storm cloud, his authority diminished, but his anger palpable. He closed the door firmly behind him and stood before my desk, refusing the chair I gestured toward. "We're family," he said without preamble, his voice rough with emotion. "Whatever your grievances, whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't how family treats family." "You made that clear when you had me sit alone at your anniversary table," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Family was a concept you applied selectively, Dad." He flinched as though I'd slapped him. One dinner compared to this corporate coup? Not one dinner. A lifetime of dismissal. My ideas ignored. My contributions minimized. While you protected Derek, even as he drove this company toward bankruptcy. I made mistakes, he admitted, the words clearly costing him. But this? Taking everything we built? Humiliating your brother? Destroying our family's legacy? "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm saving it from your outdated thinking and Derek's fraud." His face paled. "Fraud? That's absurd." I handed him the audit report. "Read it yourself." As he scanned the pages, I saw the fight drain from him, replaced by a devastation that made him suddenly look his age. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You didn't want to know," I corrected. "Just like you never wanted to know what I was capable of." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a new wariness. "And what happens now?"
Now.
I leaned forward. "Now, I do what you never did. I move this company into the future." The media frenzy continued all week. The business world buzzed with the story of the overlooked daughter who had engineered the ultimate corporate revenge. My inbox exploded with job requests, investment opportunities, and speaking invitations. My mother texted me again. "Come over for dinner? We should talk." I left it on read. 2 weeks after the takeover, I found myself standing outside the horizon once again. This time, there was no hesitation in my step, no uncertainty in my posture as I approached the entrance. The restaurant had been completely transformed. Elegant banners announcing the Women in Business Leadership Summit lined the entrance, and professional photographers captured arrivals against a backdrop bearing the logos of major corporate sponsors. My appearance at the restaurant's entrance caused a flurry of activity. The manager who had allowed me to be relegated to the children's table during my parents' anniversary now rushed forward, hand extended. "Ms. Clark, we're honored to have you as our keynote speaker tonight. Everything is prepared exactly as you requested." I offered a polite smile as I shook his hand. "Thank you. I trust there's no corner table this time." His face flushed with embarrassment as he recognized the reference. "Absolutely not, Ms. Clark. You have the head table, center stage, as befitting our guest of honor." Inside, the restaurant buzzed with energy. Over 200 of the city's most influential businesswomen had gathered for the event, many of whom had reached out following the news of my takeover. What had begun as a simple speaking engagement had evolved into something more significant. My first public appearance since becoming CEO, and a statement about the kind of leader I intended to be. I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about Clark Industries' new direction. The stock had risen 15% in 2 weeks, following my announcement of a comprehensive modernization plan and the introduction of our supply chain management system throughout the company. Ms. Clark called a voice I recognized immediately. I turned to find Jessica Wong, editor-in-chief of Business Forward magazine, approaching with recorder in hand. "Could I get a quick statement about your journey? You've become something of an overnight sensation." I smiled. "There was nothing overnight about it, Jessica. Success looks sudden to outsiders, but those who achieve it know it's built day by day, often in silence. And what about the family angle? Your parents' anniversary photo has gone viral." She held up her phone, displaying the image that had been circulating relentlessly across social media. There it was, my family gathered beneath the chandelier, glasses raised in celebration, while I sat visible in the background at the children's table, alone except for my niece and nephew. Someone had added the caption, "They made her sit at a separate table. Days later, she owned them all." I hadn't authorized or encouraged the image's spread, but I couldn't deny the power of its narrative. It had resonated with countless people who had experienced similar dismissals, who had been underestimated or pushed aside. "The past is instructive," I replied carefully, "but I'm focused on the future." As Jessica jotted down my response, I caught sight of a familiar figure entering the restaurant. My mother stood at the entrance, elegant as always in a silver dress that caught the light. She hadn't responded to my invitation. I hadn't expected her to come. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked toward me, navigating through the crowd with practiced grace. "This is quite an event," she said when she reached me, her voice careful, neutral. "Thank you for coming," I replied, equally measured. "Your father wanted to come as well," she added after a pause. "He's struggling with his pride." "And Derek?" Her expression tightened. "Derek is considering opportunities abroad." Translation: he was hiding from the fallout, waiting for the scandal to blow over.
Typical.
"I received your text," I said. "About dinner." She nodded. "The offer stands. Not to change anything, what's done is done, but perhaps to understand. On both sides." Before I could respond, the event coordinator appeared at my elbow. "Miss Clark, we're ready for you to take the stage." As I turned to follow her, my mother touched my arm lightly. "I'm proud of you, Vanessa. I should have said it years ago." The words struck me with unexpected force. After years of seeking approval, of working for recognition that never came, here it was, delivered in the aftermath of the very actions I'd taken to prove I didn't need it anymore. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and made my way to the stage. Standing at the podium, looking out over the sea of faces, including my mother's in the second row, I felt a sense of completion. The journey hadn't been what I'd expected. The victory was both sweeter and more complex than I'd imagined. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady and clear. When the staff asked if I'd like the main table tonight, I smiled and said, "Yes. But make sure there's no corner table this time." Appreciative laughter rippled through the audience. Many of you have seen the photo circulating online, my family celebration, with me notably separated from the group. That image has become symbolic of something larger than my personal experience. It represents every person who has been sidelined, whose value has been dismissed, whose potential has been overlooked. I paused, letting my gaze move across the room. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's about reclamation. Reclaiming your worth. Reclaiming your voice. Reclaiming your rightful place at the table. Not because someone finally invited you, but because you built your own table and set the terms. In the weeks that followed, Clark Industries transformed under my leadership. The innovative systems I developed streamlined operations, cut costs, and opened new market opportunities. The old guard gradually adapted or departed. New talent, drawn by the company's revitalization, filled the ranks. I never had to prove my worth again. I had already done it silently, strategically, and on my own terms. And when Business Forward featured me on their cover, the headlines simply read, "The future of business has arrived. Her name is Vanessa Clark."